Hey guys, welcome back to Bear Mountain Builds. I'm Zach, and today we're beefing up our miter saw with an expanding miter saw table. This build is perfect for you guys with a smaller shop because when it's all folded down, it is 28 inches wide and 24 inches deep. But when it comes time to put this thing to work, it expands out to 89 inches wide. That means we can even trim up a 10-foot 2x4 while holding it with just a single hand, or honestly, even a single finger. What makes a miter saw a really great tool is when you can do repetitive cuts. That's why we have an integrated T-track on both sides with an adjustable bench stop, so when you crank this down, you get the same cut every single time. Plus, it rolls. This build's pretty straightforward, and as usual, I provide detailed plans that include material section, color-coded cut lists, and full assembly instructions to make this process as easy as I can for you. With that out of the way, hit the subscribe button, and let's get started with the build. Most of you guys who regularly watch the channel know I already have a miter saw table. I did a whole video on this, so you can check that out if you're interested. But I know from my many years of being on YouTube that if I use this miter saw table to build a new miter saw table, I am for sure going to be getting a whole slew of comments saying, I guess I need to have a miter saw table to build a miter saw table. So for this build, we're not using this. Instead, we're going to be going back to the roots. This is where a woodworker starts. This is a piece of plywood on some sawhorses. This is where everybody starts off. It's either you're starting here or you're starting on the floor, and when you're 6'4", the floor is pretty doggone far away. I'm gonna assume that you're probably having a miter saw if you're watching a video about building a miter saw table, so we're sticking with our miter saw. Now we've got this thing screwed down to our piece of plywood, and we've got a stack of 2x4s clamped onto that plywood, and that's gonna be our bench top. And with this setup, we can get repeatable cuts every single time. Let's cut up some 2x4s. Last night, this was perfectly straight board. Now it's all curved. Gotta love 2x4s, baby. My back was telling me to move up to a higher surface, so we're back on the assembly table at normal people height. We've gotten everything all cut out, goes really fast, and if you're looking for dimensions, those are all in the plans linked down below, so you can check them out. So next up, we're adding in some pocket holes. If you don't have a pocket hole jig or don't want to do pocket holes, that's totally fine. You can just run your screws right in through the ends. I like pocket holes because they just hide the screws really well, but to each their own. So with that, we're gonna add our pocket holes into the ends of our cross pieces and then some pocket holes along the edges of our boards. That way we can mount our platforms. So let's keep going. We've got all of our pocket holes all drilled out, so it's time to start putting our frame together. When you're putting a frame together, you do not want to have your hardware holding all of the weight. It's good practice to just have your wood taking the weight. Now, how we're gonna do that is with lap joints. Now, lap joints are super easy, and I really like using them because it transfers all that load from your top board through your vertical boards and then into the floor. It makes a frame very strong, and it's just good engineering practice when you're building a frame to make it as strong as you possibly can, even though with a miter saw table, we're not gonna be taking that much weight. When I'm actually putting these frames together, I like to start with my vertical pieces. I'm gonna have a top cross piece and a bottom cross piece, and these are gonna locate the lower platform and the saw platform, and I'm gonna have a separating board in between those two that is going to form my lap joint. Now I have these extra pieces that are going to be my placeholders for those cross pieces so I can center my separating board, and we're just going to glue this in place, and then we're going to screw it in through the long side. That way all of our heads are on the inside of the table and less visible. We've got all of our vertical legs all done. Now you can actually see how the whole frame works in all these joints. So basically you got your cross piece, joints are going to nest together like that. Do the same thing on this side. And then we can put in our top cross piece that's going to support our saw base. And you can see this is all what our front frame and our back frame are going to look like. And you can go, it takes a ton of weight. There's not even hardware on here and it can support my weight. All our hardware is going to do is just keep these joints together, and the wood does the rest of the work. So with that, we're going to put together our front face and our rear face, and then we can actually put both halves together and have our full frame. We're going to be putting our joints together with glue and then screws through the back side of the frame. That way those heads aren't going to be visible. But along with this, these joints are going to kind of keep themselves squared automatically. I also like to use some 90-degree corner clamps. That just helps make sure that this joint is perfectly square, which means our whole frame is going to be square. All right, so we've got both of our front and rear frames all done. Only thing left is we obviously have a notch left here, which I do have spacers ready to go to install on here, but I don't want to put these in quite yet because I'm going to put my cross pieces that mount the front and rear frames together on first. So I'm going to be using these spacers to actually position these cross pieces in place, and then I can put the whole frame together. I'll finish this off with putting these spacers in place. You're now seeing that I'm using several different clamps, so if you're somebody who's still building out your shop, you really should invest in a set of 6-inch, 12-inch, 24-inch, and 48-inch clamps. As a longtime woodworker, I'll let you know, you're never gonna have enough clamps. I got a whole wall of them over there, and I still want more. So just like that, our frame is all done. It's looking really good, and it is of course rock solid. Now I'm gonna just take a second to talk about the design here. You've already seen this in the intro, but I haven't because I'm still building it, so I'm gonna go through it anyways. But we have these because we need to have the surface of our miter saw even with all of our work surfaces that are going to be our fold outs and our side pieces over here. That's why you have to nest it down like this. Along with that, our wings are mounted on these folding brackets, and the brackets need to mount onto our frame. So we extend our frame up just a little bit further. That way our brackets can mount into our entire frame. So with that, it's time to put on our caster wheels. I always use 4-inch caster wheels. You can get 2 inches or 3 inches, and they are cheaper than 4s, but I strongly recommend just spending the extra couple bucks for them because a 4-inch wheel is gonna roll over pretty much everything you find on a shop floor. These are the best wheels I've ever found, and they're pretty much the best deal too. So if you are interested in these, I'll have a link to them down below in the video description so you can check them out. Now, let's get these mounted up. When I'm mounting these caster wheels, I only use 3 lag screws, but I start off with placing it where I'm going to want it. I trace out all 3 of my holes, and then I add a centering dot, and that's where I will pre-drill. I have a little flag on my bit so I don't go too far. Then with our holes pre-drilled, we can go ahead and mount up our casters. So with our frame all done, we're moving on to our platforms. This whole build only uses a single sheet of 1/2-inch plywood, and the plans include a very detailed cut list, so it makes the whole process really easy. But to start off, we're just going to be ripping this bad boy right down the middle. So we've cut this in half, but some of these pieces are going to be double layered thick if they have T-track going through it. So what I'm going to do first, before I start gluing everything together, is I'm actually going to cut out my miter saw platform and the base platform, and then I can glue everything back together. So we've got our miter saw platform and the bottom shelf all cut out. From here, everything else is going to be 2 layers of 1/2-inch plywood thick. So to reduce my overall cuts I have to do, we're going to take this piece and this piece down here, laminate them together, and then once all that glue is dry, we can go ahead and cut out the rest of our sections. You could also just take a really heavy weight like a log or a workout plate or something and set it in the middle. That way you don't have to use quite as many clamps around the edges, but I don't know. I like having good clamping force everywhere. Now that these 2 halves of 1/2-inch plywood are laminated together, they're way stronger, and with that extra thickness it gives us a lot more meat for our T-track to bite into. So with that, we're going to go ahead and cut out the rest of our top pieces. Future Zach here. Now you're about to see me cut up this laminated piece into 4 different sections. Don't do that yet. In hindsight, it's better to actually leave this as one solid piece and then route out your groove for your T-track first. Then you can go ahead and cut up your 4 different sections. It's just much faster, more efficient, and overall easier. Now, back to current me. Good thing to note, cut the smaller pieces first, because when you get down to it and you cut your wings out, you're only going to be left with 7 inches. It's very difficult to cut 7 inches with a circular saw. You're going to need a table saw if you want to keep all your fingers. We've got all of our top pieces all cut out, and before we go ahead and add our T-track, what we're going to do is we're going to get our saw platform and our base platform in place. Now as you can tell, they don't set into place quite yet, so what we're going to do is just line everything up, trace out where our legs are, and then cut them out with the jigsaw. Also, if you don't have a jigsaw, you could just as easily use a pole saw for cutting out all these corners. Those totally fit up the first time, so now we're going to mount these up with some pocket screws. Our frame is all done. Now I put our miter saw in place because it's time to start talking about T-track. Now, if you are planning on running this miter saw, the plans include dimensions for locating those T-tracks, so you don't have to do any thinking for it. Sure, a lot of you guys are rocking some larger miter saws and sliding compound saws, so you do have to figure out where you're going to position your miter saw. Now, there's a couple things you got to consider. First is when your table's all the way positioned up against a wall in storage, you want to make sure that your saw isn't going to interfere with that wall, so you can get that thing tucked all the way up against there. That way it saves as much space as possible when not in use, and then when you pull it out away from the wall, your slider can just extend off the back of the table and it works out just fine. Along with that, if you got a sliding miter saw, a lot of times this blade catch is going to be longer, which means if you're positioned too far back on the table, it can sometimes interfere with the frame, so you just want to make sure that your miter saw is pulled far enough forward. That way you don't get any interference and you're good to go. Once you have your miter saw in its final position, you want to actually lock that thing down now, because this is the time that we're going to actually figure out where our T-track is going to go. And if you are going to move that miter saw around at all, you can't change that T-track once you make that cut. The thing you want to consider when you're putting in your T-track is that the bench stop on your T-track intersects with the fence on your miter saw. That way, if you're cutting even a sliver of a piece of wood, it will still hit up against our bench stop, because if you get too far forward, that sliver is going to slide right on by and you can't use your bench stop anymore. So you just want to make sure it intersects. And with that, it's super easy. You can locate your T-track and you're good to go. I've got my guide in place. When I am routing out a slot for my T-track, I like to do it in 2 passes. In the first pass, I'll go through at half depth. So I just find that usually by setting my router on top of 2 pieces of T-track and then just eyeball for about middle, and then I can run that through. So we've done our first pass now, it's time for our final pass. And for our final pass, we want to make sure we're as precise as we can for the depth of that cut because we want our T-track to be flush with the top of our surface. I do the same method as I did before, but I drop the bit down until it touches the wood surface, and then I know I'm at the right depth. It's always good to check this first, so use an off piece, run it through, test how your T-track fits, and then if it's all good, go ahead and do your final pass. Just like that, we've got our slots all cut out for our top platforms, and our T-track fits perfectly. However, we can't install it like this, we gotta cut our T-track to length. Now with T-track, it's made of aluminum, and aluminum is honestly really soft, so you can kind of cut it with whatever you want. You can use a hacksaw. Personally, I don't recommend it because you're not gonna get a very clean cut. What you can do instead is actually use a miter saw with a carbide tip blade. I've done it before, and it really just cuts this stuff like butter. Works super well, but in my case, I'm gonna use my multi-material chop saw. We've got our T-track mounted into our tops, so now it's finally time to get these attached to our frame. Now I'm just going to be doing this with glue and brad nails, but you could just as easily just drive a screw straight through. But as you know, I don't like screw heads. While those are drying on our frame, we're moving on to attaching our folding brackets onto our wings. When you're mounting these brackets, you want to make sure that they're both parallel to each other. It allows them to fold completely down as opposed to binding. Now, a really good way that I have found to do that is I'm using my Bear Mountain Builds universal spacers, and I just space those in at the edge using my 3/4 inch and a 1/16 inch spacer. That means that these are going to be parallel to each other, and it makes it really easy just to hold it in place while you're actually mounting the bracket on. Okay, we've got our brackets on our wings, so now we can actually mount these to the frame. Now this is a great time to have a second set of hands to kind of hold this in place, where you can then clamp everything down, then you're good to go. But here's how you do it by yourself. And hold it kind of roughly in place, and then you'll use a clamp and clamp one side down. And then once you get one side on, you can just do the other side pretty easily. Now that we got our wing all positioned, we're just going to go ahead and start mounting these up. Now you still want to keep everything parallel, but since we used our spacers before and we know these are perfectly parallel on our wing, we don't have to be quite as perfect down here. You can pretty much just eyeball it and get it close, and it just works out fine. You can either use a really long extension to get these top screws. Otherwise, I like to use just these 90-degree attachments for your impact. They work really well. Each of my spacers are 2 inches by 1 inch, and then whatever thickness is set on there. So with this, I can stack it up so I have 3 1/4 inches of space from the front edge of the table. Alrighty, the expanding miter saw table is done. It looks great. I really do love these expanding table builds, and they work really well. They're super functional for you guys in smaller shops. So if you do have a small shop, highly encourage you to check out those plans. And if you're rocking a different miter saw than what I got right here, the plans also do include some really simple formulas to adjust the frame to fit however wide or deep your miter saw is. So you can check those out. So this is my third video in my expanding table small shop video series. I also have one for my table saw and my planer. I have videos and plans for all three. And if you want to save a buck, I have a bundle for the 3 plans that you can buy them all together. Along with that, I really enjoyed designing these expanding tables. So if there's any other tools you'd like to see on an expanding table, let me know in the comments. As usual, hit the subscribe button for me so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, hit the like button for me. It helps me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it. And leave a comment. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.